Out here, buried in the heart of the Antarctic ice sheet, trust is the most valuable commodity you have. You trust the guy who inspects the heater in your hab pod not to have missed a failing gasket. You trust the pilot to read the weather data correctly. Me, I'm the geophysicist. The others trust me to read the Earth, to tell them where the good stuff is. The rare Earth minerals Geocore Atlantic is paying us a fortune to find. But I don't trust the Earth. I trust the data it gives me. There's a difference. The Earth is chaotic. Data is pure. So when the drill hit nothing, I trusted that. It happened at 8:03 in the morning, 2 hours into my shift. One moment, the deep core rig was chewing through Precambrian bedrock 4,220 meters down. The next, every significant number on my main screen went to zero. Torque, resistance, density, all of it just flatlined. A single high-pitched alarm, the one for catastrophic bit failure, sliced through the hum of the servers. I killed the alarm and stared at the screen. My first thought was that we'd sheared the drill stem. It happens. 4 clicks of spinning steel is a fragile thing, but the sensors along the stem were all green. The bit was still reporting. It was still spinning in one piece. It just wasn't touching anything. I toggled the comms. Surface team, this is Leo. Kill the rotation. Hold your depth. A voice came back, tinny with static. Copy that, Leo. Rotation killed. What do you see? I see a void, I said, my eyes tracing the lines of data that made no sense. We're in open air. That's when Harris came in. You always knew when Harris entered a room. The air pressure changed. He was the expedition leader, a man built like a cargo container who moved with the confidence of someone who has never once questioned his own authority. He brought the cold in with him, a sharp scent that clung to his parka. Talk to me, Leo, he said, his eyes already on my screens. He wasn't a scientist, but he was fluent in the language of profit and loss, and he knew how to read the numbers that mattered. The bit isn't in contact with any solids, Harris. We seem to have broken through into a cavern. A cavern, he repeated. The words sounded inadequate. Geology report said this was solid shield rock all the way to the mantle. The report was wrong, I said. Or this isn't geology. I turned to my secondary console, the one running the ground-penetrating radar. The GPR is basically a high-tech fish finder for rock. It sends radio waves down and builds a picture from the echoes. We'd been running a low-res scan during the whole drill, just for safety. Now, I keyed the system to high resolution and focused the array on the space directly below the drill bit. For a few seconds, the screen was just a cascade of noise. Then, the image resolved. Harris leaned in closer, his breath fogging a small patch of the screen. It wasn't a cavern. Caverns are messy, organic things, carved by water or collapsed by seismic stress. They have fractured walls and uneven floors. The image on my screen was clean. It showed a space of unthinkable vastness, with a floor so flat it looked machined. We could see the beginnings of walls that met the floor at perfect right angles. We could see structures, symmetrical shapes that rose from the floor, things that looked like pillars, but they were too uniform, too intentionally placed. "What in God's name am I looking at?" Harris whispered. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Data is supposed to clarify." This was the opposite of clarity. This was a contradiction in terms. "The space is enormous. Miles across, maybe. The ceiling it's vaulted, like a cathedral. Nothing in nature creates spaces like this." Harris was quiet for a long time. He straightened up and paced the small length of the station, from the server rack to the reinforced window and back again. The gears were turning. I could almost hear them. He was a corporate man, but he was also an explorer at heart, a man drawn to the blank spaces on the map. And we had just found a blank space bigger than anyone could have dreamed. "Protocol says we pull up," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "We log the anomaly, we seal the borehole, and we report it to corporate. This is an unknown structural environment. It's an unacceptable risk." He stopped pacing and looked at me. His eyes were bright, lit with a kind of prospecting fever I'd seen in old-timers who'd struck gold. An unacceptable risk, he mused, or the single greatest discovery in human history. The company that claims this, Leo, they won't just be a mining company anymore. They'll be everything. He looked back at the screen, at the immaculate, inhuman geometry hidden under 2.5 miles of ice. The men who claim it won't do too bad for themselves either. We're not equipped for this, Harris. We have no idea what's down there. The atmosphere could be toxic. The pressure... We'll send a drone first. He cut me off, his voice hardening into the tone of command. He wasn't asking for my opinion anymore. He was outlining a plan. We check the air. If it's breathable, we go. Cole can stay up here and monitor the comms. You're with me. I need your eyes. My protest died in my throat. I'm an observer, a data analyst. I was hired to sit in a warm room and tell a drill where to go. But he was right. I had to see it. The part of me that trusted data, that needed to see and measure and understand, was at war with every survival instinct I had. And it was winning. Harris clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. Get your gear, Leo, we're going down. The ride down was silent, except for the high-frequency whine of the winch motor and the rhythmic thump of the cage bumping against the borehole walls. There were 4 of us crammed inside the transport cage. Harris, myself, a geologist named Cole, and a tech specialist, Martinez. 4 men in a box, dropping through a wound we drilled in the world. Cole was practically vibrating with excitement, his eyes wide behind his goggles. He was a pure academic, the kind of man who would happily die to be the first to categorize a new type of rock. Martinez was the opposite. His knuckles were white where he gripped a safety rail. He was here because his job description included the phrase, "and other duties as assigned." I was somewhere in the middle, my own fear coiled like frozen wire around my spine, overshadowed by a need to see, to measure, to understand the anomalous data on my screen. After an eternity that my watch measured as 11 minutes, the cage shuddered to a stop. The drone we'd sent down had confirmed the atmosphere was breathable, if strange, high in nitrogen and argon, with trace elements our sensors couldn't identify. Harris gave the signal, and Martinez unsealed the cage door, shoving it open with a grunt. The air that hit us was ancient. There was a sharp chemical bite to it, like ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with the pervasive tang of ammonia. Underneath it all was a deeper smell, a musty organic scent of profound decay, like a tomb that had been sealed for 1,000,000 years. We stepped out onto the floor, our boot soles making no sound on the smooth, dark surface. It wasn't a cathedral. Harris had called it that, but he was wrong. A cathedral is built to inspire awe, to draw the eyes upward to a god. This place was built for function. It was a workshop, a factory floor. The scale of it was staggering, the ceiling lost in a gloom our headlamps couldn't pierce, but every surface, every angle was brutally intentional. Great, arching supports rose from the floor, holding up the invisible ceiling. They weren't pillars of stone. They looked like cartilage, petrified to the hardness of granite, their surfaces whirled with the patterns of old, fibrous tissue. The walls were even worse. I ran my hand over one, my light tracing the surface. It wasn't rock. It was a dense, seamless mesh of what could only be bone, fused together at a temperature that should have turned it to ash. It wasn't laid in blocks. It was woven, as if 1,000,000,000,000 bones had been melted down and poured into a mold the size of a city. My mind recoiled, trying to find a geological explanation and failing completely. "My God," Cole breathed, his voice reverent. He knelt, pulling a small spectrometer from his pack. "The density, the composition, there's nothing like this. It's silica and calcium, but the structure is biological. It's manufactured bone." Overhead, thick, dark tubes snaked across the distant ceiling, dozens of them, each as wide as a subway tunnel. They were vascular. Even from here, I could see a rhythmic contraction moving along their length, a peristaltic pulse pushing some unseen fluid through the system. I kept my helmet cam on, forcing myself to document everything. The primary structure appears to be bioorganic in nature. Supporting columns resemble ossified cartilage. Walls are a fused bone composite. I was describing the nightmare architecture with the language of the mundane, trying to cage it in familiar terms. We moved deeper in, our lights cutting pathetic swaths through the monumental dark. We passed machinery, things that sat silent and still. They were biomechanical horrors. Jointed limbs of a dark, chitinous material I couldn't identify were poised with inhuman calibration. But they didn't end in claws or drills. They ended in soft, fleshy manipulators, things that looked like sea anemones or clusters of pale, boneless fingers, built to cradle and sort. In the center of a wide, circular chamber, a sort of dais rose from the floor. Atop it was a convex membrane of pale, almost translucent flesh stretched over a frame of black chitin. Veins, thin and dark, webbed its surface, all converging on a central point. "It's an interface," Cole whispered, his voice full of an academic's rapture. He had his scanner out again, but the device was useless, its screen just a jumble of error messages. "It has to be. Look at the neural structure. It's a touch-based system." "Cole, stay back from it," Harris ordered, though his voice lacked its usual iron. He was as captivated as the rest of us. "It's dormant, Harris," Cole insisted, taking a step onto the dais. "Probably has been for eons. If I can just get a tissue sample." He didn't get the chance. He reached out, his finger hovering just above the glowing center of the membrane. Before he made contact, the light inside flared, turning from a soft pulse to a brilliant, steady glare. And the whole world changed. The deep, wet thrumming that had been the background noise of this place suddenly doubled in tempo, becoming a powerful, systemic heartbeat. A series of loud, wet, sucking sounds echoed from the vascular tubes high above as they began to pulse with a new vigor. From unseen vents, a mist began to drift into the chamber, carrying the scent of preservatives. A dozen new lights flashed to life around the room's perimeter, green patches of glowing fungus that cast everything in the color of gangrene. Cole stumbled back from the console, his hand raised as if he'd been burned. What did I do?" He never got an answer. A section of the bone-woven wall beside him slid open, revealing a dark recess. Something unfolded from the blackness, a piece of machinery deploying for a task. It was long and sleek, built from segments of the same dark chitin as the console frame, connected by bundles of exposed reddish sinew. It moved on 4 silent, multi-jointed limbs, its body low to the ground. It had no head, no eyes, no face to show intent. Its purpose was its form. It ignored Harris, Martinez, and me completely. Its movements were fast, quiet, and disturbingly smooth, like it had done this 1,000 times. It wasn't hunting us. It was retrieving something. It flowed around the dais and stopped directly in front of Cole. Cole stood his ground for a second too long, trying to raise the useless sample tool in his hand like a weapon. The construct's front limb whipped out faster than sight. A single, needle-thin barb of bone, no bigger than a knitting needle, flicked from a sheath of flesh and stabbed into the side of Cole's neck. He grunted, a sound of surprise more than pain, and his eyes went wide. His arm fell to his side. His whole body went slack, a puppet with its strings cut. He remained standing for a moment, held upright by the rigid frame of his gear, his eyes darting between us, full of terror. He was paralyzed. Then the construct went to work. With 2 of its smaller, more delicate limbs, it methodically broke Cole's arms at the elbow, snapping the bones with a dry crack to make him more compact. It folded his legs under him. Then, with a larger appendage that ended in a set of powerful, fleshy grippers, it clamped onto the back of his suit and began to drag him back toward the recess it had come from. Cole's muffled scream finally came, a desperate, strangled sound from a throat that wouldn't obey him. He was conscious. He was aware. His head was turned toward us as he was pulled into the darkness, his eyes screaming what his mouth could not. The panel slid shut, cutting off the sight, but not the sound. For 10 seconds, we heard a high-pitched, mechanical whine. Then came a series of wet, percussive noises, the sound of shearing tissue, followed by the heavy, rhythmic crack of a skeleton being systematically disassembled. Then, abruptly, silence. We ran. We plunged blindly down a wide corridor of woven bone, our headlamps bouncing chaotically, painting strobing, nightmarish images on the walls. Martinez was sobbing, a series of choked gasps. Harris was a man possessed, his face a battlefield where rage wrestled with raw, helpless fear. I was just trying to keep my feet, my mind a blank slate of panic. There was no thought, only flight. "In here," Harris said, pointing to a smaller doorway off the main thoroughfare. It was an alcove, leading to what looked like a maintenance hub or a side chamber. Critically, it had a door, a heavy slab of the bone composite material set into a grooved frame. It slid sideways, and it looked like it could be sealed. We piled inside, and Harris and Martinez threw their shoulders against the massive slab. It moved with a deep, grinding groan. I fumbled in Martinez's discarded gear pack, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the clasps. I found what I was looking for: a portable plasma welder, a heavy-duty tool used for emergency hull repairs on the surface vehicles. The door scraped shut, plunging us into darkness, broken only by our lights. Martinez held the door, while I fired up the welder. The tool whined to life, and a brilliant, white-hot point of light erupted from its nozzle, throwing our frantic shadows against the far wall. I ran the plasma arc along the seam where the door met the frame. The bone composite material hissed and smoked, melting into a glassy black slag. The air filled with the sharp stench of burning calcium and ozone, a smell like a dentist's office in hell. We were entombing ourselves, trading a quick death for a slow one, but it felt like the only sane choice. For a few minutes after the welder powered down, there was only the sound of our own breathing. We'd done it. We were sealed in. A fragile, ridiculous sense of victory came over me. Then came the first thud, a heavy, methodical impact against the other side of the door. The entire slab vibrated, and a fine powder of fused bone drifted down from the ceiling. Harris flattened himself against the door. "It's testing it, finding the weak points." He was wrong. It wasn't testing anything. It knew exactly where to hit. It was applying systematic force. With each impact, a web of hairline cracks spread from the center of the door. Then a new sound started, coming from the top of the door where the locking mechanism had been. It was a high-pitched sizzle, like water on a hot plate. I pointed my headlamp up. A thick, viscous liquid, the color of bile, was seeping through the seam I had so carefully welded. It dripped down the face of the door, and where it touched, the bone composite smoked and softened, turning into a greyish paste. The plasma weld, the pinnacle of our portable engineering, was dissolving like sugar in hot water. "Acid," Martinez whispered, his face pale in the reflected light. "It's using acid." Of course it was. A battering ram for the door and a chemical agent for the lock. The foundry wasn't just sending monsters after us, it was sending a work crew. Our technology, our desperate attempts to fight back with steel and heat, were laughably primitive. It was like hurling stones at a machine god, hopeless, outdated, and utterly beneath notice. The ram outside gave one final titanic heave. The center of the door exploded inward, a shower of bone shards and steaming acidic slurry blasting into our tiny room. In the gaping hole stood a new construct. It was a beetle of muscle and dark, polished chitin, low and wide, its front a massive armored plate. Behind it, a smaller, spider-like thing clung to the wall, a dripping nozzle retracting into its abdomen. There was another opening at the back of our failed sanctuary, a dark, circular tunnel barely a meter wide, venting a slow, foul-smelling breeze. We scrambled for it, Harris shoving Martinez through first. As I dove headfirst into the darkness, I looked back. The ram construct didn't even bother to follow. It had completed its task. Its job was to open the door. Another specialized unit would surely be along to handle the next step. The tunnel was a throat. The walls were soft and slick, yielding slightly under my hands. They were coated in a thin, mucus-like film that smelled of ammonia and rot. It was a tube of flesh, and we were crawling through the digestive tract of some creature. Harris was in the lead, his broad frame almost completely blocking the tunnel. Martinez was behind him. I brought up the rear, my headlamp beam illuminating only the back of Martinez's boots. We were moving too slowly. My mind screamed at me to crawl faster, but there was nowhere to go. "It forks!" Harris's voice, muffled by the tight space, echoed back to us. "Up ahead. Left and right. I'm going left. It feels like it's leading up." We reached the junction. It was a simple bifurcation. Two identical, fleshy tunnels splitting off into the darkness. Harris hooked a sharp left and vanished. Martinez followed, his legs kicking back as he scrambled after him. I was right behind, but my pack, heavy with geological tools I now knew were useless, snagged on a thick, cartilaginous ring that circled the tunnel entrance. I twisted, fighting the obstruction. "Wait!" I called out, my voice swallowed by the fleshy walls. For a terrifying second, I was stuck fast. I wriggled frantically, tearing at the straps, and finally wrenched myself free with a sound of ripping canvas. I lunged into the left-hand tunnel, but they were gone. Their lights had vanished around a bend. I could hear nothing but my own frantic gasps. Had they heard me? Were they waiting just ahead? I crawled faster, the slick walls greasing my progress. The tunnel began to widen, the ceiling rising. The foul air started to change, the scent of ammonia giving way to something cloyingly sweet and deeply wrong. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse mixed with an industrial chemical plant. The tunnel ended abruptly, opening out onto a wide ledge about 20 feet above a cavernous chamber. I killed my headlamp, no reason to advertise my position. The room below was lit by the same green light as before, but here it was brighter, emanating from the contents of enormous open-topped vats that lined the chamber floor. There were dozens of them, each the size of a small house, their rims stained and crusted with ancient residue. My eyes adjusted to the green gloom. I could see the contents of the nearest vat. It was filled with a viscous, opaque fluid the color of spoiled milk. Slow, greasy currents swirled on its surface, and floating in it were things. I recognized the sleek, dark shape of a Weddell seal, its carcass half submerged, the skin sloughing off the bone in long, pale sheets. Near it, a grotesque tangle of what had once been a colony of penguins, their black and white feathers a feathered sludge in the churning liquid. This was the larder, the pantry. I was hit with nausea so intense I could barely see straight. I scanned the chamber, desperately looking for Harris and Martinez, but I was alone. There was no sign of them. Had they emerged somewhere else? Or were they? My mind refused to complete the thought. I crept along the ledge, seeking another exit, another tunnel leading out. My eyes drifted to the next vat. More local wildlife. But there was something else in this one, something that didn't belong. A splash of faded color against the green-tinged slurry. I squinted. It was cloth, the tattered remnants of a padded, olive-drab uniform. As a piece of it drifted closer to the surface, I saw the glint of metal. It was a rusted button. Emblazoned on its face was a hammer and sickle inside a red star. The lost Soviet expedition. The one from the 1980s that vanished without a trace from Vostok Station, presumed to have fallen into a crevasse. Leaning forward, I saw more. A human femur, stripped clean and white, drifted past. A cracked helmet, its visor shattered, floated upside down. And then, a body, mostly submerged but horribly intact, Its face turned up toward the green-lit ceiling. Its skin was waxy and pale, its features distorted by the fluid, but it was undeniably human. This is where the raw material is broken down. This is what happened to coal. This is the fate that waited for us. My mind, the part of me that always sought data and order, finally put the pieces together. The constructs didn't kill, they harvested. They brought the biomass here to be rendered down, dissolved into this nutrient-rich soup, this fuel that powered the entire machine. The sight of the Soviet soldier floating serenely in that chemical soup broke something inside me. It broke the part of my mind that was still trying to file this place away under anomaly. This wasn't an anomaly, it was a process. An established, long-running industrial process that had claimed men 50 years ago and claimed coal 50 minutes ago with the same impersonal efficiency. My paralysis shattered. I had to move. I scrambled along the slick rock, my boots sliding, my hands searching for purchase on the weeping walls. My only goal was another tunnel, another exit, any hole that led away from this giant green-lit stomach. Then I heard a new sound, distinct from the deep thrum and the wet sloshing. It was a metallic clicking, accompanied by a scraping noise. It was coming from the main entrance to the chamber, far below. I dropped flat against the ledge, peering over the edge. A new construct entered the chamber. This one was different again. It was tall and spindly, almost skeletal, with 6 long, delicate legs that ended in sharp, metal-like points, the source of the clicking. Its body was a small, oblong pod from which a long, flexible proboscis extended, ending in a rotating brush of stiff, chitinous bristles. It was a janitor, a cleaner drone. It moved with an unhurried, programmed gait to the edge of the first vat, dipped its proboscis into the slurry, and began to methodically scrub the inner rim, its brush scraping away decades of crusted residue. It hadn't seen me. Its movements were slow, entirely focused on its task, but its presence electrified the space. I was an impurity, a contamination in its workspace. Sooner or later, it would look up. About 30 yards further down the ledge, there was another tunnel opening. It was smaller than the one I'd come through, a dark, perfectly circular hole that looked more like a service conduit than a passageway. I crept, staying as low as possible. I reached the opening and slid inside, feet first, into the welcoming, absolute dark. This tunnel was different. It was dry. The walls were hard and smooth like polished ceramic, and the air was still, lacking the foul, damp breeze of the other passageway. It was blessedly quiet. The thrum of the foundry was muted here, distant. The tunnel was short, no more than 20 feet long, and it opened into another chamber. I peered out before entering. This room was smaller and dark. My headlamp beam swept across it, revealing a space that was entirely different from the industrial chambers I'd seen so far. It felt finished, polished. The walls were lined with recessed niches, hundreds of them, arranged in a perfect grid. Each niche was lit from within by an amber light, and in each niche, resting on a bed of what looked like fibrous woven muscle tissue, was an object. It was an armory, or a storeroom. The objects were biomechanical, a fusion of dark, iridescent chitin and pale, leathery flesh. Some looked like rifles, with long barrels of bone and fleshy stocks. Others were shaped like shields or helmets, clearly designed to be worn. They were all dormant, but they weren't inert. I could see a pulse of light moving through veins embedded in their surfaces. They were asleep. I stepped into the room, my light drifting from one niche to the next. These were the products, the living tools and symbiotic weapons this entire continent-sized factory was built to create. I was standing in a room full of loaded guns, but I had no idea how to pull the trigger. My light fell on a niche at eye level, just a few feet away. The object inside was smaller than the others. It was shaped like a gauntlet, designed to cover a hand and forearm. It was made of a dark, leathery material that looked almost like shark skin, sectioned with plates of glossy black chitin over the knuckles and forearm. Driven by a morbid, scientific curiosity that had somehow survived everything else, I reached out. My fingers brushed against its surface. The gauntlet convulsed, a violent muscular twitch, and the amber light in its niche flared to a brilliant white. From the inside of the wrist opening, a dozen thin black tendrils, fine as wires, shot out and lashed around my fingers. I yelled and tried to pull back, but they held fast, their tips pricking at my skin with needle-sharp points. They were trying to get in, trying to burrow. I ripped my hand away with a surge of adrenaline, tearing the tendrils from my skin. They left behind a pattern of tiny, bleeding pinpricks across my fingers. The gauntlet writhed in its niche for a second more, its tendrils retracting slowly, like the tongue of a snake. Then it grew still again, the white light fading back to a dull, patient amber. I stumbled back, cradling my injured hand, the row of tiny wounds welling up with dark blood. Every item in this room, every potential weapon or defense demanded the same price, a piece of yourself. A willing infection. The calm of the armory was gone. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a showroom of temptations, each offering survival at the cost of my humanity. I had to get out. I turned from the wall of sleeping parasites and found the tunnel I'd arrived through. Sticking my head out, I listened. The visceral thrum of the foundry was the baseline. The rhythmic clicking of the cleaner construct was gone. But a new sound had replaced it. A high-pitched whirring, like tiny, hyper-efficient motors. It was distant, but it was getting closer. There was another exit from the armory on the opposite side from where I'd entered. A dark, arching doorway that led into one of the main bone-lined corridors. It was my only option. I took one last look at the gauntlet, still glowing with its amber light. The thought of it, of those burrowing tendrils, sent a fresh wave of revulsion through me. I chose running. I stepped out into the main corridor and froze. Far down the hall, maybe 200 yards away, a light flashed. A headlamp. "Harris!" I whispered, my voice swallowed by the immense space. I started moving toward it. The whirring sound was louder out here, echoing from intersecting tunnels. They were closing in. "Harris!" I yelled this time. The light down the hall bobbed and turned toward me. A figure waved. It was him. I broke into a run, my boots slapping against the bone floor. As I got closer, I saw what he was doing. He was kneeling in front of a panel set into the wall, similar to the one Cole had touched, but smaller. The front plate was pried off, exposing a dense, wet-looking thicket of multicolored fibers. He had a multi-tool in his hand and was trying to splice two of the fibers together. "Leo, thank God," he breathed as I slid to a stop beside him. His face was slick with sweat, his pupils dilated like a man teetering on the edge of a breakdown. "Help me with this. I think it's a power conduit. If I can short it out, maybe I can trigger a system-wide shutdown." I stared at the panel. The fibers weren't wires, they looked like optic nerves. The panel had an oily, rainbow sheen to it, like a patch of motor oil on water. "It's not electrical, Harris. You can't hotwire it. It's a nervous system. It's a machine," he snapped back. He jammed the tool in again, trying to sever a thick blue fiber. All machines have an off switch. The whirring sound was suddenly very close. I looked over my shoulder. Coming around a bend not 50 feet away was one of them. The same type that had taken Cole. Sleek, silent, and efficient. It was flowing, its headless body scanning the corridor. It hadn't seen us yet, but it would. "Harris, we have to go, now!" I grabbed his shoulder. He shook me off, obsessed, almost got it. The construct stopped. It rotated its body, its sensors locking onto us. It lowered itself, its limbs coiling like springs. It was going to move. "Harris!" I screamed, pulling him with all my strength. He finally looked up, saw the construct, and the insane hope in his eyes died. He looked at me, then at the creature. He knew we couldn't both make it. He shoved me, hard. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and landing heavily on the floor. The push sent me sprawling 10 feet away into the shadow of a large cartilage pillar. It was just enough. The construct launched itself. It cleared the distance in a fluid blur. Harris didn't even have time to raise his hands. The same needle-thin barb whipped out and plunged into his chest, right through the heavy material of his parka. His body went rigid, the multi-tool clattering to the floor. He didn't scream, he just collapsed, paralyzed, his eyes wide and fixed on me. It was a look of grim finality, the look of a captain who had made his last command. The construct worked quickly. It folded him, snapping his limbs with the same dry cracks I'd heard before. It secured him to its back and turned, dragging him away down the corridor, back the way it had come. I watched until his headlamp was just a fading point of light in the darkness. Then came the awful sounds from far down the hall. Shearing, cracking, then silence. I could stay here and wait for the next patrol, or I could go back. I could go back to the armory, to the waiting parasite, to the amber light and the burrowing tendrils. I pushed myself to my feet, my hands still throbbing, the pinpricks of blood like a fresh stigmata. There was no choice at all. There was only the price. The walk back to the armory was the quietest journey of my life. The whirring of the patrol constructs had faded into the distance, and even the foundry's great heart seemed to beat softer. I stood before the niche, before the gauntlet. Its amber light was a welcoming glow in the darkness, a siren's call from across a black sea. It looked exactly as I had left it, a promise of power nestled on its bed of woven flesh. I held up my right hand, the one it had marked. The tiny pinpricks had stopped bleeding, leaving a constellation of dark red dots across my fingers and palm. An invitation, stamped in my own blood. This was it. There would be no going back from this. I would either die here, convulsing on the floor as this thing devoured me from the inside out, or I would become something else, something that could walk out of this place. I wasn't sure which fate was worse. Slowly I reached into the niche and wrapped my bleeding hand around the gauntlet's grip. It felt cool and dry, like old leather. The leathery skin warmed against my palm, a sudden, feverish heat. The chitin plates over the knuckles glowed with a network of thin red lines. And the tendrils came. They flowed, sliding out from the wrist cuff and wrapping around my forearm. I gasped as their needle-sharp tips pressed against my skin, and this time, I didn't pull away. I closed my eyes and gritted my teeth, waiting. The pain was a white-hot explosion. It was a violation on a cellular level. The tendrils dissolved my skin, sinking into flesh with a sizzling chemical burn that sent waves of agony screaming up my arm. I could feel them moving inside me. It was an intimate, grotesque sensation, like feeling worms burrowing through your muscle. They were seeking, questing, wrapping around nerves, latching onto the ulnar and radius of my forearm, anchoring themselves directly to my skeleton with a series of sharp jolts. I fell to my knees, a choked scream tearing from my throat, my entire body convulsing with the shock. But the physical pain was only the beginning. As the tendrils found my nerves, they found my mind. A torrent of alien information crashed into my consciousness. It was a flood of raw, unfiltered data. An avalanche of predatory instinct, threat assessment, nutrient levels, system integrity, biomass proximity. My vision fractured, the world dissolved into a psychedelic nightmare. The bone walls of the armory were no longer solid. I could see them as they truly were. A network of biological structures with a warm, nutrient-rich fluid pushing slowly through microscopic channels. The air was thick with a soup of biochemical signals, each one glowing with a color my human eyes had no name for. I could see the heat signature of my own body, a bright flare of red and orange against the cool blue of the chamber. The gauntlet tightened its grip on my bones, and through the agony, a new sense bloomed. I could feel the foundry, not as a place, but as a body, I could feel the slow, steady pulse of its central heart, miles away. I could sense the location of the cleaner construct in the vats, a dull, blue-green node of simple, repetitive programming. I could feel the patrol constructs moving through the corridors, sharp, predatory sparks of white light. I could feel where Harris's raw material was being rendered, a chaotic storm of biochemical breakdown. I was on my hands and knees, drool and tears mixing on the floor, my body shaking uncontrollably. The pain began to subside, receding into a low-level thrum that resonated in perfect time with the foundry's own pulse. I pushed myself up, my arm feeling heavy, alien. I looked down at it. It was no longer my arm. The dark, leathery skin of the parasite had fused with my own, the seam between them a puckered, angry scar. The chitin plates were dark, but I could feel the power coiled beneath them. Dark veins, now a mix of my blood and its own internal fluid, flashed with a slow, steady rhythm just beneath the surface. I had survived the union. I stood up, unsteady, a hybrid creature in a hall of bone. I was still Leo, but my senses were no longer my own. I had become a system error, a walking, thinking, terrified cancer in the body of the machine. And for the first time since we breached this hell, I could see the way out. I stood, breathing in a world that was no longer just matter, but information. The corridor outside the armory was a living schematic. Lines of golden light flowed through the floor, the main arteries carrying refined nutrients. Dull, sluggish rivers of brownish red marked the waste conduits. The patrol constructs I'd been fleeing from were now visible to me as sharp sparks of white light moving in precise patterns through the hallways. I could feel their directive, their purpose: seek unincorporated biomass, immobilize, and transport to processing. My own body was a bonfire of complex heat and chaotic energy. But my right arm was a bridge. It glowed with a blue-white light in my new vision. A hybrid signal that wasn't quite foundry, not quite human. I was a bug in the code, a rogue process. I turned my senses upward, searching. A column of absolute nothingness, a place where all the glowing lines and systemic data just stopped. It was a hole in the world. The way out. I could feel the path to it, a branching network of corridors and chambers, and I could see the patrol routes of the white sparks intersecting that path at a dozen points. I couldn't outrun them, and hiding was no longer an option. I wasn't invisible to them, just confusing. The first one that got a clear reading on me would flag me for decommissioning. I needed a diversion. I let my senses expand, pushing the gauntlet's perception outward. The sheer volume of data was staggering, a tidal wave of biological information. I focused, forcing the torrent of input through the filter of a single question. Where is the greatest point of vulnerability? Deep in the level below me was a primary nexus, a place where two of the Foundry's major systems converged. A massive vascular tube carrying waste slurry, that dull, ugly, brown-red light, ran parallel to a primary nutrient artery, the clean, brilliant gold of finished fuel. The two were separated by a huge biological valve, a sphincter muscle the size of a small car, designed to push waste material into a final reclamation pit, a direct feed of that toxic, unprocessed sludge into the main nutrient line. It would be like injecting raw sewage into a jugular. The entire system would register it as a catastrophic internal hemorrhage. Every available defense mechanism would be redirected to contain the breach. That was my target. I began to move, my new senses guiding me. I descended through a wide, spiraling passage. Up ahead, one of the white sparks of a patrol construct rounded a corner, its path set to intersect mine. It flowed into view, the same sleek, headless design that had taken Cole and Harris. It stopped about 20 feet from me. In my new vision, I could see its sensor array flash as it focused on me. A flicker of confused data sparked between us. It saw my human heat signature, the telltale sign of prey. But it also saw the blue-white signal of my arm. an authorized piece of foundry hardware. Its programming locked, caught in a logical loop. It couldn't classify me. After a long, tense moment, its primary directive reasserted itself. I was not unincorporated biomass in the strictest sense. I was an error, but not a priority one. It turned and continued on its patrol route without a sound, leaving me alone in the corridor. I reached the junction. It was just as I had seen it. A colossal organ of grey muscle embedded in the wall, contracting rhythmically to push waste into a pit below. Beside it, the golden nutrient artery pumped with fresh energy, vibrant and clean. Set into the wall next to the valve was a control node, a fleshy, membrane-covered panel. This was the place. I approached and laid my gauntlet hand flat against the membrane. The moment of contact was electric. I was interfacing. My consciousness, filtered through the gauntlet's alien architecture, poured into the foundry's network. I bypassed the programmed sequence and forced a single catastrophic instruction into the valve's motor neurons. Open, reverse flow. The great sphincter muscle convulsed violently, fighting against millennia of ingrained programming. A deep, tearing sound echoed through the chamber as tissue strained and ripped. With a wet shudder, it wrenched itself into the wrong position, opening a direct channel between the two massive arteries. The effect was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The foul, brownish-red waste material flooded into the pure, golden nutrient line. The clean light was immediately corrupted, turning a mottled green. Across the entirety of my new senses, a silent scream of pure panic erupted. Alarms flared across the foundry's network. Contamination! System integrity compromised! Catastrophic biotoxin event! Every single white spark representing a patrol construct instantly changed its vector, abandoning its route and hurtling at top speed toward the nexus, towards the source of the infection. The foundry's entire immune system was now focused on the mess I had made. And the path to the borehole, the path to the dark wound in the foundry's ceiling was wide open. The chaos I'd unleashed was my cover. While the foundry's immune system scrambled to quarantine my manufactured disaster, I ran. I sprinted through the monumental corridors of bone, my altered arm held out like a divining rod pointing towards salvation. The foundry was in agony. The deep thrumming had become a frantic, arrhythmic pounding. Great shudders ran through the floor. The glowing vascular tubes overhead contracted erratically, their light flickering like dying embers as the corrupted nutrient fluid spread through the system. The entire structure was having a seizure, and I was the cause. I could feel the constructs, the white sparks of their existence, converging on the nexus I had just left. They were a swarm of angry antibodies racing to the wrong wound. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with the chemical air. Finally, I reached it. The vast open space directly beneath the borehole. High above, a perfect circle of utter blackness broke the pattern of the bone-woven ceiling. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The winch cage was still there, a tiny steel box hanging at the end of its cable, a relic from a world that no longer seemed real. My escape was right there. 4,000 meters of steel cable between me and the blessedly dead world of ice and sky. But as I looked up, a new sensation pricked at my awareness. A single, powerful presence. It was coming from a large chamber that opened onto this space, a room I hadn't sensed before. It had been dormant, offline, but the system-wide alarm had woken it. It was a spike of pure, focused intelligence, something complex, aware. I didn't have time. I ran to the cage. I slammed my hand on the control panel, but the lights were dead. The winch motor had no power. Of course it didn't. The borehole was a wound, and the foundry had cauterized it, cutting off all power to the surface, likely the moment we breached it. My only way up was to climb. To climb a 4-kilometer cable dangling in the dark. I looked at the cable, then back at the chamber entrance where I felt the intelligent presence growing stronger. I didn't have a choice. I jumped, grabbing the thick, greasy steel of the winch cable. It was wider than my grip. I started to climb hand over hand, my boots finding purchase on the thick weave. The climb was brutal. My muscles screamed, my human half crying out for rest. But the gauntlet, the parasite, seemed to lend me strength, its own alien biology working to sustain my efforts, to push me onward. I was maybe 100 feet up when it emerged. It stepped out of the chamber into the open space below me. It was bipedal, and that alone was more terrifying than any of the multi-limbed constructs. It was tall, at least 8 feet, and unnervingly slender. Its body was encased in plates of iridescent pearl-white chitin that seemed to shift in color as it moved. It had long, elegant limbs that ended in 3-fingered hands. It had a head. It had a face. There were no eyes, just a smooth, polished plate of chitin. But I could feel its gaze on me, a focused, analytical beam of perception that was 10 times more powerful than any constructs. It didn't feel angry. It didn't feel malevolent. It felt curious, like a biologist examining a particularly interesting bacterium that had contaminated his experiment. This was a controller, an operator, maybe even one of the beings this factory was built for. It raised one of its long, delicate arms, and the gauntlet on my own arm screamed a silent warning. A jolt of energy shot through my senses. It was a command, a simple, undeniable instruction sent directly to the parasite grafted to my body. Cease function, detach. My arm seized. The symbiotic link I had forged in pain and desperation was being overridden by its own master. The tendrils inside me convulsed, trying to obey, trying to rip themselves free from my nerves and bone. The agony was blinding, 1,000 times worse than the initial bonding. My grip on the cable faltered. My vision went white with pain. This was it. It wasn't going to send a monster to kill me. It was just going to turn off the tool I had stolen and let gravity do the rest. But in that blast of pure alien command, the creature had made a mistake. It had opened a direct channel. And in my agony, driven by the pure animal terror of falling, my own consciousness, my own desperate will to live, surged down that channel. I didn't send a command, I sent a feeling. The raw, unfiltered human terror of plunging into darkness. I pushed my fear, my desperation, my memories of Cole and Harris and the horrifying wet sounds of their end into the link. The creature below me recoiled. It physically took a step back, its smooth, featureless face tilting in what I could only interpret as shock. It had expected to communicate with its tool, with a piece of compliant hardware. It had not expected to touch the raw, chaotic, screaming mind of the microbe that was wearing it. The pain in my arm subsided. The kill command was broken. I had a few seconds. I looked up into the darkness of the borehole, then down at the stunned, white chitin figure. I started climbing again, frantically, fueled by a surge of hope. I had hurt it. I had surprised it. And in this place, surprise was the only weapon I had left. The surface, the cold, freedom. I climbed, my body a machine of desperation, leaving the astonished mind of the foundry's master staring up at me from the darkness below. My world shrank to the circumference of the steel cable and the burning pain in my shoulders. Hand over hand, a desperate vertical crawl toward a patch of black that promised salvation. Below me, the foundry was a bed of dying embers. The controller's intelligent presence was still there, but it made no further move. My psychic scream had apparently broken something in its understanding of the universe. It was watching me, studying me, adding this new insane data point, prey that fights back with fear, to its knowledge base. Hours blurred into a single agonizing effort. My human body was failing. My arms were twin pillars of fire. But the gauntlet fed a steady energy into my muscles, overriding my pain receptors with its own imperative. Survive. It pumped my own adrenaline back into my system, sharpening my focus when exhaustion threatened to send me plunging back into the dark. We were a single symbiotic machine of ascent. The walls of the borehole changed. The smooth bone gave way to rough-hewn, shattered bedrock. Then the bedrock was coated in ice, thick and ancient, that glittered like diamonds in my headlamp beam. The temperature plummeted. The chemical air of the foundry was replaced by a clean, thin, brutally cold draft from above. It was the breath of the real world. At the edge of the black, a single white spark hovered, remote, unwavering. A star, a single point of perfect, white light in the circle of black. A sob escaped my lips, freezing instantly on the frigid air. The sight of it, that simple, distant fusion reaction, broke the spell of the climb. It was real. The world was still there. I moved faster, a frantic final burst of energy. My headlamp beam struck the underside of the drilling rig, a metal leviathan frozen into the ice shelf. With one last heave, I pulled myself over the lip of the borehole. I collapsed, rolling away from the dark abyss and onto the solid, unforgiving snow. I lay on my back, gasping, my body shuddering uncontrollably. The wind howled, a physical force that tore at my clothes and stung my face with ice crystals. Above me, the aurora australis painted the star-dusted sky in shifting curtains of green and violet. It was the most beautiful and painful sight I had ever witnessed. It was the sky of home. Tears froze on my cheeks. I was alive. I was free. I had survived. The relief was a physical thing, a wave of warmth that spread through my chest, so powerful it felt like it would break me. I had crawled out of hell and was lying on the roof of the world. After a long time, the shivering subsided enough for me to move. I sat up. My first thought was of the gauntlet, to get it off, to sever this last connection to the nightmare below. I looked down at my right arm. It was no longer an object I was wearing. The fusion was complete. In the ethereal light of the aurora, I could see it clearly. My own skin, pale and chapped from the cold, flowed into the dark, leathery hide of the parasite without a seam. The line between man and alien had been erased, replaced by a smooth, grotesque gradient of tissue. The black chitin plates were embedded in my arm like a second set of bones, and I could see the steady pulse in the veins beneath its surface, veins that were now my veins, carrying my blood. I tried to make a fist. My human fingers clenched, but the parasitic hand moved with them, its longer, more slender digits curling in perfect, horrifying unison. I could feel the muscles in my forearm, and beneath them, I could feel the separate, colder flecks of the creature's own internal structure. It was a part of me. It was a part of my nervous system, a part of my skeleton, a part of my circulatory system. I had escaped the biomass foundry, but a piece of it, a living, breathing, sentient piece, had escaped with me. I was a carrier, a hybrid, a walking, breathing relic of a place that should not exist. And as I sat there, alone in the howling emptiness of the ice, a single, terrifying thought echoed in the quiet corners of my mind. The controller was down there, learning, and I had just taught it what human beings are capable of. The rescuers found me 3 days later. A Norwegian survey team, blown off course, saw the smoke from the generator I'd managed to get running. They found me in the comms tent, huddled over a dead radio, my right arm tucked carefully inside my parka. The official story, the one that went into the initial reports, was simple. A catastrophic drilling accident, a total loss of the expedition team, and one lone survivor suffering from severe frostbite and exposure. They were half right. I never saw a public hospital. I never gave a statement to the press. From the Norwegian icebreaker, I was transferred at sea to a nondescript research vessel flying under a Panamanian flag. It was there, in a medical bay, that they finally saw my arm. The hushed whispers, the frantic calls on satellite phones, the way no one would look me in the eye for more than a second, it all confirmed what I already knew. I was no longer a person. I was an event. They gave me a new name. They gave me a new life, I live in a comfortable house in a place with no winter. The sky is always blue. The pantry is always full. A quiet, unassuming man named Mr. Shaw visits me every Tuesday. He says he's from a risk management division at Geocor's parent company, but we both know that's a lie. He brings me books and asks me questions. He is my therapist, my analyst, and my jailer. "How does the arm feel today, Leo?" he'll ask, his voice calm and even. They have a name for it. Subject Symbiote Designation 1. They call it the asset. To them, I am just the interface. I tell them what they want to hear, that it's dormant, that the connection feels distant, that I have nightmares. They nod and take notes and run scans. They have a team of the world's best biologists and physicists studying my arm from a respectful distance, terrified of what they might find, more terrified of what they might miss. But I never tell them the truth. Not the whole truth. The truth is, the connection isn't distant. It's a constant hum at the base of my skull. When I sleep, I don't have nightmares. I have data streams. I see schematics of living tissue. I feel the patient pulse of the foundry's heart, 4,000 kilometers away, beating steadily beneath the ice. The link isn't severed. Distance means nothing to it. I am a receiver, a walking antenna tuned to a single horrifying station. Sometimes the arm moves on its own. My hand will clench while I'm reading, the alien fingers tracing patterns on the page that I don't understand. It shows me things. Through the wall of my house, I can see the heat signature of a bird nesting in a tree. I can feel the water flowing through the pipes. I can sense the electrical current in the wires. It's a language of pure information, and I am becoming fluent. I spend most of my days in the study Mr. Shaw had built for me. The walls are covered in satellite maps of Antarctica. I track weather patterns, ice shelf movements, magnetic field fluctuations. I do it because it's the last piece of the old Leo I have left, the man who trusted numbers. But I am lying to myself, too. I watch the data not for what it tells me about the world, but for what it tells me about the foundry. And what I feel through the symbiotic link is this. The chaos I unleashed has subsided. The system is repairing itself. But it's also adapting. It's learning from the data I gave it. It's learning about irrationality, about desperation, about the tactical advantage of fear. Last night, I felt something new. A shift in the deep thrum, a change in the manufacturing process. It's building something. Something it has never built before, designed to hunt. Something that understands how we think. I look at my right hand, at the place where man ends and monster begins. The controller learned from my fear. But I learned from its logic, and I know, with a certainty that chills me more than any Antarctic wind, that it is building a key, and I am the lock it's designed to open. The rescue wasn't the end of the story. It was just a brief intermission before the invasion.